Hi, you're watching Reddit Confessions. If you've ever had that one moment, the exact second you knew your life was never going to be the same again, then you'll understand this. I didn't find the texts. I didn't catch them in bed. I found her scent. It was 6:43 p.m. when the front door opened, and I was still standing in the hallway, pretending I wasn't shaking. She walked in with that casual, breezy attitude, dragging her wheeled luggage behind her like she'd just returned from a peaceful retreat with old friends. She even hummed. She had the nerve to hum while she hugged me with arms that still held his cologne. Not just a cologne. His. You don't forget a scent like that. Not when it's burned into your memory from the one time you accidentally hugged the guy she once called a work friend. I remember it because it wasn't even subtle. It was bold, heavy, and expensive, like something worn by a man who doesn't worry about consequences. I didn't say a word. I just inhaled, and then everything inside me cracked. She kept talking about the hike that almost killed her and the worst sushi ever, and some inside joke I wasn't invited to. I nodded like a fool while staring at her suitcase, waiting for it to unzip itself and tell me the truth. It didn't. She changed into her robe and left her clothes on the bathroom floor. I walked in after she went to shower. I picked up her denim jacket. I held it to my face. The smell was there again, stronger. And this time I saw something. A receipt in the pocket. Dinner. Table for two. In a completely different city than the one she said she visited. She wasn't with her friends. She wasn't even in the same state. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the mirror. I wanted to ask why I had spent the last 3 days tracking her Instagram likes like a lunatic while she was being kissed by someone who probably didn't even know my name. But I didn't. Because I had already planned what was in the closet. It had been there since Sunday night. Folded. Waiting. I'd written the note 3 times, rewritten it twice, burned one version in the sink like I was performing some kind of ritual. And now, it was just a matter of time. She stepped out of the shower wrapped in steam and lies. She kissed my cheek like she wasn't soaked in guilt. I asked if she'd unpack. She said, maybe later. I said, I already made space for your new things. She smiled and walked toward the closet. And when she opened it, she didn't scream. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She collapsed. She dropped like a puppet whose strings were cut. No sound. No attempt to brace herself. Just knees buckling and then silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. The closet door creaked slowly back on its hinge, as if even it was trying to look away. I should have rushed to her. I should have called her name or knelt beside her or done something that resembled the man I used to be. The man who would have panicked at the sight of her unconscious on our bedroom carpet. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, the way you do when you watch a movie you've already seen but can't quite believe it's happening again. I didn't need to look at what she saw. I knew what was in there. I knew it because I had folded the shirt myself, exactly how she folded mine, with stupid, careful precision, like it mattered. And on top of that shirt, right in the center, was the envelope. The red one. Her favorite color. I didn't write her name on it. I didn't need to. Inside was the receipt from the lakeside Airbnb, the one booked under her maiden name, along with printed photos from her shared location history. But that wasn't even the worst part. The final thing in the envelope was the note. Just 6 words. I stopped waiting. So I left. Because the truth is, I had already gone. Not physically. Not yet. But mentally, emotionally. I'd left that house the moment I caught the scent on her jacket. I knew then that whatever we were, it wasn't us anymore. It was me, orbiting a memory, and her, floating off into someone else's bed. I just needed her to see it. To see herself. And now she had. I didn't even know what she saw first. Maybe it was the shirt. Maybe it was the scent of his cologne that I had sprayed onto it before folding it up, the very one I'd smelled on her neck when she hugged me at the door. Or maybe it was the photo of him with his arm wrapped around her in front of that rental cabin, smiling like he'd won. She stirred, just barely, a twitch of the fingers, a choked little sound, half gasp, half denial. I watched her eyes flutter and fixate on the closet again, like she thought maybe it had changed, like if she blinked hard enough, the proof would vanish. Linus, she croaked. That was the first time she'd said my name in weeks. I didn't respond. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth, I might cry or scream or beg, and I wasn't going to give her that. Not anymore. She crawled to the closet, on her hands and knees like the truth had weight. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the envelope again, flipped flipping through its contents like she thought maybe she'd misunderstood. But there's no misunderstanding when you're holding a photo of yourself in lingerie that you didn't wear for your husband. She turned to me. I will never forget that face. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. It was shock. Pure disbelief that I, of all people, had found my spine. That I had been watching while she was out, reconnecting with herself. That I had turned our bedroom into a confessional. I can explain, she whispered. No, I said. You can't. And I don't want you to. Then I told her the part that finally made her mouth open in horror. The part that twisted her whole expression into something less human. I told her he had a wife. And that she had already called me. I'll never forget the first time I heard her voice, the other wife. Her name was Clara. I still can't believe she sounded so calm. Not angry. Not hysterical. Just tired. Tired in a way only someone shattered by the person they trusted most could sound. It was Sunday morning, just hours before Ivy returned home. I was sitting in my car at the end of our block, hands shaking around a lukewarm gas station coffee, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. I had the location pings. I had the receipts. But I didn't have proof. Not until Clara called. Is this Linus? She asked. There was a pause before she added. I think our spouses are involved. The rest of that conversation is a blur. I remember her saying she found messages. Hotel confirmations. One of them used our anniversary date as a password. She even apologized. She apologized to me. Can you believe that? I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know who else to call. I've been watching them live for months, and I thought you should know. I don't remember much else except hanging up and sitting in silence for 20 minutes. No music. No tears. Just the creeping realization that I had been the last to know. Again. So when Ivy collapsed in front of the closet and looked up at me with those glassy eyes, I didn't hesitate. She called me. I said, the man you've been with? He's not just your secret. He's someone else's husband. His wife knows everything. And now so do I. Ivy's face drained of color. She covered her mouth and let out this noise, this strange, muffled, animal sound. I didn't comfort her. I didn't reach for her hand like I always used to do when she cried. Because I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see the truth every time she turned her back to me. She tried to stand, but her legs wobbled. She grabbed the dresser for support and muttered, "It wasn't supposed to. It wasn't serious." That was the moment I finally understood how far gone she was. Not serious? She disappeared for 3 days. Lied to my face. Slept with a married man in a town she said she'd never been to. And it wasn't serious? You wore his scent like it was yours, I said, my voice cracking despite myself. You brought it into our house. Our bed. You didn't even try to hide it. She covered her ears. Like a child. I wanted to yell. To let everything out. But something inside me refused. Because I didn't want to hurt her anymore. I just wanted out. I packed already, I told her. You can have the house. You clearly already had the freedom. I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm with the same desperation she once used to pull me close at night. Wait, you're just leaving? She said, her voice rising. I looked at her and didn't recognize the person begging me to stay. Her face was twisted with panic, not love, not loss, just fear of consequence. I left days ago, Ivy, I whispered. You just didn't notice. And then came the cruelest part of all, the moment that still haunts me more than the betrayal. She laughed, this soft, breathless, broken laugh. You really think I'm the only one who lied in this marriage? She asked, voice shaking. You think you've been perfect? You think you haven't made me feel invisible for years? That's when I realized she was ready to throw the match too, and she had her own fire to start. I stood there stunned. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to throw that line at me. After everything, after the deception, the sneaking around, the way she came home still smelling like him. She had the audacity to twist the knife by saying I made her invisible? My throat tightened. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, but I kept my voice low. What are you even talking about? I asked, more confused than angry. I worshipped the ground you walked on. She scoffed. No, Linus. You worshipped a version of me that didn't exist anymore. The me from 10 years ago. You stopped seeing who I actually was. That stung, more than it should have. Because a part of me knew there was truth buried in that accusation, even if it didn't justify what she'd done. I'd clung to the image of the woman I married, the carefree Ivy with the loud laugh and wild ideas. And maybe she had changed. Maybe we both had. But I wasn't the one who ran off to pretend I was single again. Ivy took a step closer, her voice shaking now. You didn't notice when I stopped sleeping next to you. You didn't ask why I deleted my birthday post last year. You didn't care when I stopped wearing my ring. You just kept going like everything was fine. I opened my mouth to argue, to explain that I did notice those things, but I thought if I waited long enough, she'd come back to me. I didn't want to force it. I didn't want to make her feel suffocated. So I waited. Like an idiot. I waited for her to reach for me again. She never did. You think I didn't feel guilty? She snapped. I did. Every second. But guilt doesn't fix dead things. You didn't want to touch me anymore, Linus. You wanted to preserve me. The room felt smaller. Her words bounced around like echoes in a jar. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that she cheated or the idea that she believed she had to. Then why stay? I asked finally. Why come back at all? Why not just tell me you were done? Her eyes shifted. That was the first time she looked truly afraid. Because I wasn't sure I was done, she whispered. I kept hoping you'd do something dramatic, that you'd finally see me. But all I got was your quiet loyalty. And I hated you for it. Those words hit me like a slap. She hated me for being loyal. I turned toward the doorway, needing distance. My heart felt like it had been flayed open. All those years I spent walking on eggshells, thinking I was giving her space and patience and support. She saw it as indifference. I paused halfway down the hall. Ivy, I said, not turning around. You want to be seen? You want dramatic? She didn't answer. I looked over my shoulder and added, check the guest room closet. Her brows furrowed. What? But I didn't repeat myself. I walked out the door and into the fading daylight, down the front steps, and across the street where my car was still parked from the night before. I sat behind the wheel, phone in my lap, and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then I saw the blinds in the guest room twitch. I closed my eyes, imagining her reaction. Because inside that closet, buried behind the old winter coats and photo albums, was the second envelope. This one didn't contain pictures. This one held something worse. A printed transcript of her entire girls' trip group chat. The one Clara had forwarded to me from her husband's synced iPad. Every message, every plan, every lie spelled out with emojis and sarcasm. One message in particular had seared itself into my memory. He's harmless. He'd never leave. I could burn the house down, and he'd still ask if I wanted dinner. That's what she told them about me. That's what she believed. And now, she was finally watching the flames. I didn't watch her read it. I couldn't. I sat in the car with the engine off, keys dangling from my fingers, stomach twisted into knots that wouldn't come undone. There's something hollow about knowing you've hurt someone, even if they hurt you first. That second envelope wasn't revenge, not really. It was just the truth. A truth I'd buried for too long while pretending that love was enough to survive in silence. I imagined her sitting on the edge of the bed, the papers in her lap, fingers trembling as she skimmed through the chat thread like a criminal reading her own confession. It started light. Jokes. Emoji-laced complaints about domestic stagnation. Ember called it that. Ivy laughed and added, Linus thinks he's the rock in this relationship, but it's more like a weighted blanket. Comfortable and suffocating. That one cut deep, but not as deep as the message that came a few scrolls later. Can't believe you're actually going away with Miles. Ember had texted. He's married too. Don't you feel even a little bad? Ivy's reply? Not really. Clara never appreciated what she had. Linus won't even notice I'm gone. They'll both survive. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the confidence in it. The assumption that she'd get away with everything because I was safe. Predictable. Pathetic. But maybe I was. I used to think strength looked like not raising your voice. Like enduring. Like holding your breath while someone tore pieces off you, hoping they'd stop before they reached your heart. But now, sitting in that car with my palms sweating and heart thudding in my chest, I wasn't so sure anymore. The porch light flicked on. She appeared in the doorway, barefoot, clutching the stack of messages like they were some ancient curse she'd unearthed. For a long moment, she just stared at the street like she couldn't figure out where I'd gone. Or maybe she knew I was close and just didn't know how to face me. Then she spotted the car. I watched her cross the yard slowly, like she was walking through fog. She stopped a few feet from my window and knocked once. I didn't move. She opened the door and slid into the passenger seat without asking. We sat there, in silence, with only the creak of the leather and the ticking of my hazard light reminding us that time was still moving. I didn't mean it, she said finally. Not all of it. I laughed. A small, bitter, breathy laugh I didn't recognize as mine. You meant enough of it, I said. She looked at me with tear-rimmed eyes, mascara slightly smudged, but no apology came. Just explanations. Justifications. Like if she talked long enough, the timeline of her choices would make sense. I was lonely, she whispered. You stopped asking me things. We stopped touching. We stopped living. I turned to her, jaw tight. And you think cheating fills that gap? You think sneaking around with a married man fixes what you never even tried to repair? She didn't answer. So I did. You could have told me, Ivy. You could have said you were drifting. I would have listened. I would have changed. But you chose this. She looked out the windshield, voice barely audible. I didn't think you'd fight for me. Those words shattered something in me that had somehow survived the rest. Because she was right. I hadn't fought. I waited. I hoped. I prayed silently that she'd find her way back. But I never fought. And maybe, just maybe, she needed me to. Maybe she needed to know that I'd tear the walls down to keep her. And when I didn't, she found someone who did. Even if it was fake. Even if it was poison. And now it was all broken. But it wasn't over yet. Because Clara, the other wife, had just texted me again. And this time, she had something she thought I needed to see in person. Clara didn't want to meet at a coffee shop or a diner or anywhere public. Too many eyes, she texted. She gave me an address to a park on the edge of town, the kind of quiet place where the trees bend in over the path like they're trying to eavesdrop. I didn't tell Ivy where I was going. I just said, don't be here when I get back. Her face twitched at that, but she didn't protest. Maybe she thought I was bluffing. Maybe she thought I'd come home with flowers and forgiveness. That wasn't going to happen. I got to the park just after sunset. The air smelled like damp leaves and cold dirt. Clara was already sitting on a bench, arms crossed, a manila folder on her lap like it weighed more than paper should. She looked up when she saw me and gave a sad little nod, like we were two soldiers from opposing armies who ended up in the same trench. Thanks for coming, she said. I know this is awful. I nodded, sitting down a foot away from her. What did you find? She handed me the folder without a word. Inside were printed screenshots, not just messages, but photos. New photos. Ones I hadn't seen. Some of Ivy and Miles. Others just of him, shirtless, taking mirror selfies in what was very clearly my bathroom. In one shot, his watch, a ridiculous gold thing, was sitting on my nightstand next to the lamp I'd bought Ivy for our 3rd anniversary. And then there was the photo that made my stomach turn. Ivy, wearing my hoodie, sitting on our back deck. In his lap. She had sent it to him with the caption, he's still asleep. Morning bliss. I stared at that picture for too long. My hands went cold. My vision blurred around the edges. I could practically feel the fabric of that hoodie, the one I always wore on Sundays while making pancakes, now soaked in some sick memory I couldn't erase. Clara was watching me. She didn't interrupt. When I finally looked up, she pulled out one last piece of paper. Here, she said. This is the part that made me feel physically ill. It was a printed email draft, retrieved from her husband's laptop. Apparently, he never sent it, just saved it. Maybe as a fantasy, maybe as a future plan. But it was real. And it was titled, If We Leave Them. It outlined how they could start fresh in another state. How Ivy had already looked into teaching yoga at a resort out west. How Clara and I would move on eventually. It even joked about which furniture they'd take from which house. My house. My couch. My life. Talked about it like it was a clearance sale. I couldn't speak. I felt hollow. Clara reached into her coat pocket and handed me something else. A small flash drive. I saved everything, she said quietly. In case you want to take it further. Legal, I mean. I nodded slowly, not because I had a plan, but because I didn't trust my voice. We sat there for a while longer, not saying much. The crickets were louder than us. When I finally stood up, Clara did too. Can I ask you something? I said, my voice rough. Of course. Do you think they ever loved us? Or was this just convenience? Clara didn't answer right away. She stared into the dark path ahead, then whispered, I think they loved us until they didn't. And by the time they noticed, we were already leftovers. That word, leftovers, stuck with me the whole way home. When I pulled into the driveway, the house lights were still on. I half expected to walk into silence or find her gone entirely. But no, Ivy was sitting at the kitchen table, still in the same robe she'd been wearing that morning. Her eyes were swollen. Her phone was face down, and she looked shattered, not like someone who got caught, like someone who got abandoned by the fantasy she thought would save her. "I know where you went," she said without looking at me. "Then you know what I saw?" She nodded. Her fingers toyed with the edge of the placemat. "I want to explain it all," she whispered. "No," I said, walking past her. I stopped in the hallway, turned back just once, and added, "This isn't a story you get to narrate anymore." And that night, for the first time in years, I didn't sleep in our bedroom. And she didn't sleep at all. The silence between us the next morning was the kind that didn't need to be filled. It was thick, loud in its own way, and stretched across every room like a fog no amount of sunlight could burn away. Ivy barely moved from the kitchen table. I didn't even look at her when I walked past. I packed quietly, methodically. One suitcase, a laptop bag, the old duffel I used to take on work trips she barely remembered. I wasn't rushing. I wanted her to hear every zipper, every drawer closing, every hanger clicking empty in the closet she once used to leave handwritten notes in. There were no notes now, just receipts and echoes. Around noon, she finally spoke, not with guilt or even a last-ditch apology, but with this unbearable whisper of desperation that cracked under its own weight. "Linus, can we just talk?" I didn't stop packing. "We've done enough talking. You just did most of yours behind my back." "I made mistakes," she said, standing now, taking a cautious step toward the bedroom like I was a stray animal about to bolt. "But we both did. You gave up on me long before I gave in to anything." I turned, slowly, facing her for the first time in hours. "I didn't give up on you, Ivy. I gave you space. I gave you trust. And you filled that space with someone else while laughing about how blind I was." She blinked fast, then crossed her arms over her chest like she was trying to protect herself from her own choices. "So what now? You just leave? That's it?" "No," I said. "You don't get to ask that like this is some surprise. I'm leaving because you already did. I'm just the one packing." Her expression twisted. For a second, she almost looked like the woman I remembered, the one who used to wrap her arms around me while dancing barefoot in the kitchen. But that version of her was buried now, and no amount of apologies could dig her out. "Where will you go?" she asked, and this time her voice cracked for real. "Does it matter?" She didn't answer. The rest of the afternoon passed in silence. I finished packing. I called the realtor. The house was in my name, and I had already made a decision. I wasn't going to sell it just yet. I was going to hold it, let it sit empty like the promise she broke. I'd find somewhere else, even if it meant starting over in a rented room with creaky floors and no internet. But before I left, I had one last thing to do. I opened my laptop, pulled up an old shared album Ivy and I had created years ago. One she had apparently forgotten was still linked to her cloud account. Dozens of photos had been silently synced there over the last few months. Some of her, some of Miles. A few screen recordings she must have accidentally triggered. It was all there, not graphic, nothing that would break terms or laws, but enough. Way more than enough. I copied the entire folder onto a USB drive. Then I wrote a short email. Not to her. To Miles. Subject: "Your mess is now yours alone." Body: "You'll want to tell your wife before she sees it from someone else. But just in case you don't, she already knows. And so will your boss." I attached one blurry selfie of him in my backyard. Just enough to confirm I had more. Then I clicked send. Not for revenge. Not to destroy him. Just to make sure he couldn't crawl away untouched while I was left with the wreckage of what they burned down together. Ivy was standing by the front door when I came downstairs. She looked like she hadn't moved in hours, like she'd been bracing for an explosion that didn't come. I didn't give her a speech. I didn't ask for tears. I handed her a folded note and said, "Don't read it until I'm gone." She reached for it slowly, like it might hurt her. And maybe it would, because inside wasn't a love letter. It was a timeline. A list of every moment I had noticed she was slipping away and chose not to say anything. Every date she forgot. Every kiss that felt forced. Every night she turned her back, and I blamed myself for the distance. And at the bottom of that page was just one line. "I don't hate you. I just can't follow you into the version of yourself that forgot how to love me." Then I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. But 5 minutes later, when I stopped at a gas station to breathe, I saw a notification light up on my phone. It was a message from an unknown number. And all it said was, "Ivy isn't who you think she is. You missed the worst part." I sat in the car staring at that message for over 10 minutes. "Ivy isn't who you think she is. You missed the worst part." It came from an unknown number with no name, no signature, just that single, cryptic sentence that threatened to pull me back into the fire I had just escaped. I thought about deleting it, pretending I never saw it. But of course I didn't. Instead, I replied, "Who is this?" No response. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Still nothing. So I did what any broken-hearted fool still half-tethered to the past would do. I dug. I searched the number. It was a temporary burner, untraceable. Probably someone too afraid to say more. Or someone with just enough guilt to need me to know there was more dirt under the surface. But you know what? For the first time in this whole miserable unraveling, I didn't take the bait. I didn't chase. Because I realized something while staring out across the parking lot of that gas station. A hard truth I wish I had learned earlier. There's always more betrayal to find if you keep looking for it. But there's also life to be lived if you finally stop. I turned off my phone, drove north, found a small motel outside Bloomington with a broken vending machine and the quietest night I'd had in months. That morning, I watched the sun rise over a strip of highway I'd never driven before, drinking terrible coffee from a paper cup and feeling something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Not joy, not victory, just peace. In the weeks that followed, I didn't go scorched earth. I didn't destroy her reputation or send her photos to her family. I let the lawyers handle what needed to be handled. The house was put up for sale. The shared accounts were split. The life we'd built, the version that had turned into a lie, was slowly dismantled, piece by piece, like packing away a dream that no longer fit. Ivy tried to contact me once. A long, rambling voice message. She cried, apologized again, said she was in therapy, said Miles had gone back to his wife, said everything except what I needed to hear. I never responded, because the closure didn't need to come from her anymore. It came from me. The moment I realized that I'd rather rebuild from rubble than keep living in a house made of ghosts. And here's the real ending. It's been 5 months. I moved into a small apartment. Started hiking. I know, ironic, right? The guy she said never noticed her became the guy who finally noticed himself. I even signed up for a community pottery class. I made a lopsided bowl last week and smiled like a kid who finally colored outside the lines and didn't get scolded for it. And one evening, I met someone. No, not a rebound. Not a distraction. Just a kind soul who asked me, "What's your story?" And I didn't flinch when I told it. Because now, it's just that, a story. Not a wound. Not a weight. Just a page I turned. So if you're watching this, and you're going through something that feels like the end of everything, maybe it is. But maybe that's okay. Because sometimes, the best thing that can happen is when you finally walk away. Thanks for watching Reddit Confessions. If you've ever experienced a moment that completely changed the course of your life, something shocking, emotional, or even uplifting, tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe for more true confessions from people just like you.